had been planning that solo camping trip for months. I wanted something quiet, something far from work, far from noise, far from everything that felt like pressure. I chose a remote area near an old logging road that people rarely used anymore. The place was deep in the woods, surrounded by tall, thin pines that all leaned slightly in the same direction, as if a strong wind had pushed them once and they never forgot it. The air felt clean in a way city air never did. It had that cold smell you get when leaves hold on to the last bit of dew and dirt mixes with old pine needles. I remember feeling excited, thinking I finally had time alone to breathe. I parked my car near a faded road closed sign, grabbed my backpack, and walked about 2 miles until I found a small clearing. The ground was flat and soft, with a mix of dirt and dry needles. I set up my tent, spread out my sleeping bag, and began gathering wood. There was no sound except birds and the constant soft creaking of the tall trees. At first it felt peaceful, like I had stepped into a world where nothing bad could reach me. But sometimes silence makes your mind sharp in the wrong ways. The more you listen, the more you notice things you didn't notice before. As the day moved on, the forest changed little by little. The air grew cooler, the shadows longer. The wind picked up and carried the scent of damp earth. I cooked a simple meal on a small burner, ate slowly, and watched the sky shift from bright blue to deep orange. I remember thinking how perfect everything felt. Still, there was something strange about being alone in a place so empty. I could feel it even before anything happened. It was like the woods were waiting for something. Once it got dark, I lit a small fire. The sound of burning would echoed through the clearing like cracks from faraway branches. I sat close to the heat and felt the cold night pressing against my back. At first, the noises of the forest didn't bother me. I had camped alone several times before, and I knew animals moved around at night. But something about that night felt different. It wasn't the animal sounds that bothered me. It was the moments where everything went completely still. There were long stretches where I didn't hear a single thing. No crunching leaves, no wind, no birds. It felt unnatural, like the forest was holding its breath. Each time that happened, I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I just wasn't used to this level of quiet. But deep down, it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. When I finally put out the fire and crawled into my tent, it was around 11 p.m. The darkness outside the thin tent fabric looked heavy, almost like a thick blanket pressed against the walls. I zipped up my sleeping bag and lay still, listening. At first, it was just normal forest noise again, soft rustling far away, the occasional snap of a twig. I started drifting off, my mind slipping into that half-sleep where everything feels distant. Then I heard the first sound that didn't fit. It was slow steps, very faint, somewhere deeper in the woods. Not the random, light steps of a deer. These were heavier, more controlled, spaced out like someone was placing their feet carefully on the ground. I held my breath and listened harder. The steps went quiet, then came back, then paused again. I couldn't tell how far they were, but I knew they were moving in my direction. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a boar, maybe something big enough to sound human. But the rhythm was wrong. Animals don't move like that. They don't walk in steady, careful steps. The steps stopped again. This time, they didn't start up. I waited for several minutes, staring at the tent ceiling even though I couldn't see anything. I finally told myself I had imagined it and closed my eyes. But right when I felt sleep coming back, I heard something else. It was a deep, slow breathing sound. Not loud, but close enough that I felt my chest tighten. The breathing wasn't coming from inside me, and it wasn't the wind. It had weight to it. I couldn't tell if it was from a person or an animal, but it felt wrong that it was so close and I hadn't heard anything walk right up to my tent. I stayed frozen for several seconds, barely even blinking. The breathing went on and on, steady, slow, as if whoever or whatever was out there was taking its time. The sound was coming from my left side. I didn't dare move my head to look. I just focused on the sound and tried to figure out what it was. Then something brushed against the side of my tent. Not hard, just a soft drag, like fingers running against the fabric. My stomach dropped. Every part of me told me not to move. I didn't even want to shift my weight. I felt like if I made the wrong sound, something awful would happen. The dragging sound continued slowly, following the curve of the tent. Then it stopped near my feet. The breathing was louder now, closer. I wanted to grab the knife in my backpack, but I knew any movement would make noise. So I just lay there, trying to steady my own breathing so I could hear better. The woods stayed completely silent except for that slow, heavy breath right outside my thin shelter. Minutes passed. The breathing stayed. Then it stopped suddenly. The silence felt even worse. Total, complete silence. I didn't know if the thing outside was still there or if it had moved away without making a sound. I listened so hard my ears hurt, but I heard nothing. I stayed like that for almost an hour. I didn't sleep at all. My body refused to relax. Every muscle felt tight. I kept waiting for another sound, another brush against the tent, but nothing came. The silence held all the way until the very first light of morning. As soon as I saw a faint gray glow through the fabric, I slowly unzipped my sleeping bag. My movements felt stiff, shaky. I grabbed the knife, unzipped the tent door inch by inch, and peeked out. There was nothing in the clearing. No person, no animal. But the ground outside the left side of my tent was disturbed. The dirt and pine needles showed a clear mark where something had stood for a long time. Not shaped like a footprint exactly, but compressed in the kind of way weight presses into soft ground. The side of the tent had faint smudges too, as if something greasy or muddy had touched it. I packed my things as fast as I could. I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting to see movement in the trees. The forest felt different now, less quiet and more watchful. I could almost feel eyes on me even though I saw no one. When I finally stepped back onto the old logging road and headed toward my car, I felt a kind of relief I've never felt before. When I reached the car, I noticed one last detail that made everything worse. The layer of dust on the back window had a long, thin smear running across it, like someone had dragged their fingers straight across the glass. I don't know who or what was in those woods with me that night. I don't know how long they watched me before I even noticed the footsteps. Maybe they had followed me from the moment I left the old road. Maybe they were already in the clearing before I arrived. I will never know, but the strange breathing, the soft dragging on the tent, and the smudge on the car window all told me the same thing. I wasn't alone out there, and whoever was out there didn't just pass by. They stayed close, too close. Since that trip, I haven't camped alone again. I still remember that night every time I think about going back into the woods. The worst part is not knowing the face of whoever stood outside my tent, not knowing their reason, not knowing how long they watched me before letting me know they were there. The forest gave me silence that night, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that holds something behind it, something hidden, something waiting. And even now, when I try to sleep, sometimes I think I hear that same slow breathing again. Steady, patient, too close, like it never really left. And that's why I never went back. I went camping near Lake Tahoe because I wanted to see what it felt like to sleep under the open sky without a tent. I had seen people do cowboy camping in videos and it looked peaceful. Just a sleeping bag on the ground. Nothing separating you from the air, the stars, and the night. I thought it would feel freeing. I didn't think about wildlife too much. Being English, the most dangerous thing I grew up around was probably an angry swan. I wasn't used to the idea that big animals could be walking around while I slept. I knew bears lived around Tahoe, but knowing something in the abstract is much different from accepting that a bear could walk right next to you while you were asleep. I reached my camping spot in the late afternoon. The lake was still and clear, with that cold blue color you only see in mountain water. The trees stood tall and tight, stretching up the hillside in thick clusters. I chose a small open patch of ground just far enough from the trees that I could see the sky clearly. The sun was still bright, but the air cooled the moment it touched my skin, the kind of coolness that comes from deep water and high altitude. I spread out my sleeping bag, checked the ground for rocks, and tried to settle in early. The evening was calm. Birds made sharp calls as they settled down in the trees. The smell of pine needles filled the air. The lake moved in small ripples that made soft sounds against the shore. I ate a small meal and cleaned up carefully, trying to do everything properly because I had read about bears being attracted to food. I stored everything far away from where I planned to sleep. I told myself that if I did everything right, nothing would happen. The sun went down slowly, leaving a clear, cold sky full of stars. Being out there with no tent above me felt strange at first. The open sky made me feel small, almost exposed, but in a peaceful way. The ground was cold but firm, and the sleeping bag held the warmth in well enough. I lay there for a long time, staring upward, waiting for sleep to come. At some point, maybe around midnight or a little after, fatigue finally pulled me under. My breathing slowed and the night became a blur of half-formed dreams and shifting temperatures. The forest around me was quiet at first, then not quiet, then quiet again. I woke a few times to adjust my position, but each time I drifted back off. Then I woke again. This time was different. I didn't sit up or move. I just opened my eyes naturally, expecting to see the stars again. Instead, I saw darkness. Not the open darkness of the sky, not the dim shape of nearby trees, but something solid, something above me, a shape blocking everything else out. A huge shadow hovering directly over my body. For a second, my mind didn't understand what I was seeing. I thought maybe I had pulled part of the sleeping bag over my head. But the shape wasn't fabric. It was a large, dense silhouette with slow, steady movement. My eyes adjusted and I saw fur. Thick, dark fur. I saw a curved shape that I realized was a shoulder. I saw the faint outline of a head lowering slightly. A bear was standing directly over me, not several feet away, not at the edge of the clearing, not wandering past. It was looming over my body, its massive shape blocking the sky, its front paws planted on the ground so close I could have reached out and touched them. Its breath moved the air above me in soft, heavy waves. The smell was wild and heavy, a mix of earth, fur, and something I couldn't even name. My entire body went numb. Not like the numbness from cold, but the numbness that comes from fear so pure it shuts everything down. My chest tightened. My hands felt frozen. My legs felt as if they were sinking into the ground. I couldn't even breathe properly. I felt my lungs pause, waiting for something, anything. I had never seen a bear before. Not in the wild, not in a zoo, not anywhere. And suddenly one was standing inches from me while I lay helpless in a sleeping bag on the forest floor. The idea of danger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. It was towering over me. I didn't move. I didn't blink at first. I just stared upward at the enormous, silent shape. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it echo in the ground underneath me. I knew that making any sudden movement could go wrong. I knew I was too close to even think about getting up. If I sat up fast, it might react. If I tried to crawl away, it might follow. If I made a noise, I had no idea what it would do. So I did the only thing my terrified mind could think of. I closed my eyes. I let my body go limp. I let my breathing slow. I tried to make myself look like I was still asleep. I swallowed the panic climbing up my throat and pretended I had never woken up in the first place. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, to run, to claw at the ground, anything, but I forced myself to stay still. The bear shifted its weight. I felt the small vibrations in the soil as it moved. I could hear it sniffing, not loud, not aggressive, just a slow inspection. The world shrank to those tiny sounds. The rustle of fur, the soft crunch of pine needles, the faint huff of its breath. I didn't know how long it stood there. Time felt stretched thin, like every second lasted a minute. I felt the air on my face shift as the bear leaned a little closer. I could feel warmth from its body, stronger than the cold air around me. My mind kept repeating useless thoughts about distance, weight, claws, teeth. I knew how powerful bears were even without ever seeing one before. Just the size of the shadow above me told me everything I needed to know. Then, finally, I heard it move. Slow steps at first, shifting its weight backward, turning slightly. The sound of paws pressing into the ground. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't change my breathing. I lay there as still as I could. The steps moved away from my head. Then a few more steps. Then I felt the air return above me, open again to the sky. I waited longer. I didn't know if it was gone or just circling. I kept my eyes closed another few seconds that felt like hours. Then I slowly opened them to a thin strip of sky between the branches. The bear was walking away into the trees, its heavy body moving with a slow confidence, disappearing into the darkness without making much sound at all. I stayed frozen in place long after it left. My heart beat so hard I felt overheated inside the sleeping bag. My mouth was dry, and I had to remind myself to breathe properly again. Every part of me shook with a mix of fear and relief. I didn't sit up. I didn't move from that spot. I just lay there staring at the sky, feeling the cold night air wash over me now that the bear's warmth was gone. The rest of the night passed painfully slowly. Every crack in the forest floor, every rustle of wind through the trees made my body tense up. I kept imagining the bear coming back, or another one passing through. I didn't sleep again. I didn't even close my eyes for more than a few seconds at a time. The ground felt harder than before. The air felt sharper. I waited for dawn like it was the only thing that mattered. When the first faint light finally reached the sky, I sat up and looked around carefully. The forest looked harmless again in daylight, calm and open. But I could see prints in the soft dirt near my sleeping bag. Clear, heavy bear tracks. They were close enough that I could put my hand beside them and see how small I was in comparison. That sight alone made my stomach twist. I packed up slowly, checking every direction over and over, half expecting the enormous shape to return. But the forest was empty. The lake was quiet and smooth. The whole place seemed untouched, like nothing had happened at all. But my body still felt the weight of that moment when I opened my eyes and saw a wild animal towering over me. The ending was simple, but sharp and unforgettable. The bear had wandered off, uninterested in me. It wasn't hunting or attacking or trying to harm me. It had simply been curious or passing through, and I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But lying there helpless under its shadow was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. It made me understand how small a human can feel when nature decides to walk close. And even though nothing tragic happened, that image of waking up and seeing a bear standing over me stayed burned into my mind, as real and vivid as the cold air that morning by Lake Tahoe. I went camping alone on the Yorkshire Dales because I wanted a quiet night away from everything. I thought the open fields, the cold air, and the huge sky would help clear my head. I reached the spot late in the evening, after the sun had already dropped behind the rolling hills. The light faded fast, and the open land started to feel much bigger and emptier than it had during the day. There were no nearby campers, no cars passing on distant roads, nothing except the wind sliding over the grass and the soft hum of insects settling for the night. I set up my tent on a small flat patch near a low stone wall. The grass was knee-high in some places, flattened in others, as if animals walked through that area regularly. I didn't think much of it. The dales were full of sheep. I saw them earlier in the evening when I first arrived, scattered across the hills like white stones. They were quiet by nightfall, out of sight now, but I assumed they were curled up somewhere in the darkness. The temperature dropped quickly. By the time I finished eating a simple meal and settled into my sleeping bag, the cold had settled deep into the ground. The only warmth I felt came from the small pocket of air trapped around my body inside the bag. The wind pushed against the tent every few minutes. Sometimes it came as a soft wave, sometimes as a strong shove that made the nylon walls ripple and snap. I tried to relax and let the sounds become part of the background, but I couldn't fully shake the feeling that I was more exposed than I expected. I lay there in the dark, staring at the faint shape of the tent ceiling, thinking about how far I was from any house or road. The thought wasn't scary at first. It was peaceful. I came out there for the silence, and I had it. But silence has a way of changing at night. It stops feeling like rest and starts feeling like waiting. Waiting for what I didn't know. Sometime after midnight, I must have drifted into a light sleep, the kind where your body feels heavy but your mind is still half awake. Everything around me was quiet. No wind, no distant animal noises, nothing. That silence pulled me in deeper until it suddenly broke. A scratching sound, very faint at first. Sharp, quick movements like something brushing against the tent fabric. My eyes snapped open immediately. It came again, a little louder this time, like claws dragging over the nylon. My heart jumped, and I felt it thud against the sleeping bag. I stayed completely still, listening. The darkness inside the tent felt thicker. The air felt tighter. The scratching came again, slow and irregular, as if whatever was causing it didn't know exactly what it was doing. I tried to breathe slowly, but my chest tightened with each sound. The idea of an animal outside crossed my mind, but the movement didn't feel right. It wasn't pacing. It wasn't sniffing. It was scraping. The scratching grew louder, more focused. It moved along one side of the tent, dragging from the top to the bottom in one long stroke. I could hear the fabric tremble. Something was pressing against it now, a weight, a presence pushing inwards. The whole side of the tent sank a little, as if something was leaning into it. I felt a cold rush go through my stomach. The darkness felt endless, and I had no idea what was inches away from me. I couldn't see a shape. I couldn't tell if it was low to the ground or standing tall. I just knew it was right there, pressing closer. Then the bulge grew. The entire left wall of the tent pushed inward, slowly but heavily, until the fabric was only inches from my face. It felt like something large was leaning down onto it from above. The tent groaned quietly under the pressure, the poles bending just enough to let me know something serious was happening. A scraping sound followed, deeper this time. Not the quick scratching from before. This one dragged, long, heavy, like something hard sliding against the tent skin. I felt the ground shake a little beneath me. For a moment I couldn't move. My hands clenched around the inside of the sleeping bag. Every instinct in me screamed to get up, but my legs wouldn't respond. The bulge pressed even further. The top corner of the tent dipped so much it almost touched the floor. Something pointy pushed sharply through the fabric, not enough to tear it open, but enough to show a clear shape. A thin, hard pressure jutting inward, pushing lower and lower. My thoughts started racing. Person? A knife? Someone crouching? Someone leaning with their whole body weight? Out there in the middle of the night with no sound, no warning, no reason? My blood felt hot and icy at the same time. The pointy object pressed down again, harder this time, and the tent wall sank another few inches. I snapped out of the frozen panic and forced myself to move. I unzipped the sleeping bag, the sound painfully loud in the quiet air. My hands were shaking so much I almost missed the small zipper on the tent door. I grabbed it and pulled as quickly as I could. The ripping sound of the zipper echoed in the darkness. My mind was ready for the worst. Person crouched outside. Someone waiting. Someone holding a blade. Someone leaning over the tent. The fear felt bigger than the tent itself, filling every inch of space around me. I threw open the flap and burst out into the night air, half crawling, half jumping. The cold hit me instantly, raw and biting. My feet sank into the damp grass. My breath came out in fast white clouds. No one was there, just open land stretching out in every direction. The Dales were silent again, calm and still. The moonlight showed the rolling hills clearly. No person, no movement, nothing. But something was next to the tent. A shape, white, still, lying on its side. A sheep, not dead, just sleeping, or rather knocked half asleep by its own stupidity. It had apparently wandered around the tent and somehow managed to slump its full weight directly onto the side of it. The pointy weapon pressing through the fabric was its leg. The scraping sound was its fleece dragging down as it shifted. The heavy pressure was its whole body rolling partly onto the tent wall. The moment I understood, my fear drained so fast it left me lightheaded. My legs felt weak, and I had to steady myself. The sheep lay there blinking slowly, confused and completely unaware that it had nearly given me a heart attack. It lifted its head, stared at me as if I was the one causing trouble, then rolled a little and stood up on shaky legs. It wandered off into the darkness without any hurry, leaving me standing there in the cold night air, breathing hard, feeling my heartbeat slowly settle. I checked the tent. The wall was stretched, the fabric damp with sheep hair pressed into it, but nothing was torn. The pole was bent slightly from the weight but still functional. I cleaned off the loose grass and the tufts of wool that stuck to the nylon. The night suddenly felt twice as cold now that the adrenaline had worn off. I sat outside for a while, letting my nerves settle. The hills felt peaceful again, as if nothing had happened, the way nature always ignores human fear. The sheep was gone, probably finding another comfortable place to sleep, hopefully one that wasn't on top of my shelter. When I finally crawled back inside the tent, I zipped the door tight and lay down again, still thinking about how close I had been to sprinting into the darkness barefoot with nothing but panic guiding me. Every sound after that felt louder. Every brush of wind felt sharper. But nothing else happened. I didn't sleep much, but I made it to morning. When the sun rose and spread light across the hills, the sheep from the night before stood not far from the tent, grazing calmly, as if it hadn't nearly crushed me a few hours earlier. Seeing it in the daylight made the whole night feel unreal, but I could still feel the fear in my chest when I remembered that bulging tent wall and the sharp point pressing down. The ending was simple and clear. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anything planned or intentional. It was just a sheep, heavy and clueless, choosing the worst possible place to take a nap. But in the middle of the night, in the dark of the Yorkshire Dales, that harmless animal turned into one of the scariest moments I've ever had outdoors. And even though nothing truly dangerous happened, the memory of that pressure and that scraping sound stayed with me, reminding me how easy it is to panic when you're alone in the wild with only thin fabric between you and the darkness. I still think about the night my family and I went camping in an area that was supposed to be safe, quiet, and protected. It was marked clearly as a no-hunting zone. A peaceful slice of forest meant only for hiking, camping, and enjoying the outdoors. We trusted that sign. We trusted the rules. And that trust almost got us killed. We arrived in the late afternoon. The air warm and clear, the forest buzzing softly with insects and the distant calls of birds settling into their evening rhythm. My parents chose a spot a short walk off the main trail, tucked between tall pines with plenty of flat ground for a tent. The ground was covered with dry needles that made a soft sound under our boots. The sunlight filtering through the trees was golden and warm. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad could possibly happen. We set up our tent, a big family-sized one with enough space for all of us to sleep comfortably. It stood tall and clean in the middle of the clearing, a bright patch of fabric against the darker trees. We put our sleeping bags inside, laid everything out neatly, and walked around the area, exploring a little. There were signs posted nearby reminding people not to hunt, not to shoot, not to disturb wildlife. We didn't think about those signs much. They were just part of the backdrop, the way park rules always were. As the sun sank, the temperature dropped a little, but the air stayed pleasant. We cooked a small meal over a portable burner and watched the sky change from orange to deep blue. The forest grew quieter as night settled in. A few stars appeared above the treetops. Everything felt calm, almost too calm, like the world had slowed down and wrapped itself around us. We weren't far from the tent when it happened. We had wandered maybe 20 meters away to look at a small stream running nearby. The water glowed slightly in the fading light. The sound of it moving over rocks was soft and steady. We were just standing there, taking it in, tired from the long day. Then gunshots ripped through the forest. The first one was so loud it felt like the air itself snapped. My whole body jumped. The sound came from somewhere close, too close. It wasn't a distant echo. It was sharp, violent, immediate. Then more shots followed, one after another, rapid bursts cutting through the silence. The forest that had felt so peaceful a moment before suddenly felt harsh and dangerous. My heart slammed in my chest. I felt the shock before I felt the fear. The sound echoed through the trees so quickly that it was impossible to tell exactly where it came from. All I knew was that it was close enough that something was wrong. Hunter or not, someone was firing a gun in a no-hunting area, in a place where people could be walking, sitting, cooking, anything. We ran back toward the tent without speaking, our footsteps pounding the ground. The forest blurred around us. My ears rang with the echo of those shots. I didn't know if more were coming or if someone out there could still be aiming at something or someone. Every shadow between the trees looked like a threat. When we reached the clearing, I stopped so fast the dirt slid under my shoes. The tent was torn apart. At first, my mind couldn't understand what I was seeing. The fabric was shredded. The bright colored material ripped open in long, violent lines. Holes were punched through every side. The poles lay snapped and twisted. The sleeping bags inside were ripped open, the stuffing spilling out like snow on the ground. Bullet holes, dozens of them. The fabric had been hit so many times it barely looked like a tent anymore. There were holes burned dark around the edges, fresh tears, and bits of metal glinting faintly in the moonlight. Whoever had been shooting hadn't just fired randomly into the forest. They had shot directly at our tent, straight into the area where we slept. If we had been inside at that moment, if we hadn't wandered off just when we did, there wouldn't have been anything between us and those bullets. The realization hit me hard. My stomach twisted. My legs felt weak. The gunshots we heard weren't warning shots, weren't distant hunting accidents, weren't someone firing into the air. They had been aimed. They had torn through every inch of the tent we had slept in the night before. The thought of my sleeping bag sitting there with holes through it made my skin crawl. I looked around the clearing even though I was terrified to see something I didn't want to see. The forest was silent again, but in a heavy, unnatural way. Not peaceful, not calming, just empty, as if whatever had caused the destruction had already vanished. I scanned the tree line for movement. Nothing shifted. Nothing breathed loudly. Everything felt wrong. Felt like the woods were holding their breath. I walked around the tent slowly, my heartbeat still racing. The ground around it was disturbed. Pine needles were kicked aside. Dirt was scraped in patches. Shell casings were scattered around like someone had been standing right there, firing into the tent from only a few steps away. The thought made my entire body tense. Someone had stood right where I was standing now. Someone had aimed a gun at that tent without knowing who or what was inside. Or maybe they had known. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they thought a tent was fair game even in a no-hunting zone. I couldn't make sense of it. My mind kept looping through possibilities, each one worse than the last. We stayed in the clearing only long enough to grab what hadn't been destroyed. The sleeping bags were useless. The tent was beyond repair. Some of our gear had holes through it. A few items were untouched, lying off to the side, but nothing felt safe. The forest felt different now. Every noise was sharper. Every rustle in the leaves made my brain react as if another gunshot was about to explode through the air. Leaving that clearing was the only thing that made sense. Even though we didn't hear any more shots, even though the night grew still again, none of us felt safe. The walk back to the trail felt endless. My mind kept replaying the image of the shredded tent, the holes everywhere, the damage that could have easily been done to us. We didn't stop until we reached a safer area near the car. The night around us felt huge and cold, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been too close, too reckless, maybe even too careless about the lives that could have been inside the tent. The ending, when I look back on it now, is painfully clear.
No mystery, no fantasy, no hidden threat.
Just reality. Someone had been shooting illegally in a no-hunting area, and for reasons I will never know, they fired directly into our tent. They didn't wait to see if anyone was inside. They didn't check. They just pulled the trigger again and again until our camp looked like a battlefield. We were lucky, nothing more than that. Lucky we weren't there. Lucky we weren't sleeping inside when bullets tore through the fabric. Lucky the gunshots came when they did, giving us just enough warning to run back and find the tent empty instead of something far worse. I still think about the sound of those first gunshots, sharp and sudden in the quiet of the forest. Every time I remember them, I also remember what the tent looked like when we got back. And it reminds me how quickly a peaceful night outdoors can turn into something terrifying, even without monsters, even without anything unreal. Sometimes the scariest part of camping isn't nature at all. It's the people who don't follow the rules meant to keep everyone safe. When we finally got home after that night in the woods, none of us could shake what had happened. The tent shredded with bullets, the shell casings in the dirt, the silence that fell over the forest afterward. It all stayed stuck in my mind like something unfinished, something that didn't sit right no matter how I tried to explain it to myself. We didn't waste time. As soon as we settled back in the house, still shaken and tired, we went straight to the police station. The building felt too bright, too normal compared to the dark, tense forest we had escaped the night before. I remember the cold feeling in my chest as we sat inside, waiting for someone to hear us out. Everything felt surreal. My mind kept replaying the gunshots, the shock, the shredded fabric. My body felt heavy with leftover fear. When we explained what had happened, the officer listened, took notes, and said they would look into it. They told us it was possible someone was fooling around with a gun, maybe shooting at trees, old targets, or random objects without realizing anyone was camping nearby. They said it happened sometimes, even in no-hunting areas, careless people, irresponsible shooters, people who thought rules didn't apply to them. They told us not to worry too much. They said it was probably an accident. They said the shooter likely didn't know we were there. I tried to accept that explanation. I really did, but something didn't sit right. The shot patterns in the tent didn't look like wild, random shots. They were grouped, deliberate, concentrated on the tent itself, not scattered through the trees. Someone had stood close and fired at it again and again. Someone had aimed at the tent like it was the only target they cared about. But I was tired of thinking about it, tired of feeling afraid, tired of replaying the moment in my head. The officer's explanation was simple and easy to accept. Maybe that was comforting in a way. So we nodded along, thanked them, and tried to move on. Life slowly returned to normal over the next few weeks. But something had changed in me. Whenever I walked at night, even in familiar places, I felt a little more alert, a little more sensitive to sudden sounds. The gunshots had carved something sharp into my memory. Camping didn't feel the same anymore. Even at home, safe in my own bed, I sometimes imagined the sound of bullets tearing through fabric. And then, 2 months later, something happened that made my stomach drop in a way I didn't expect. I was scrolling through local news when the headline caught my eye. Someone had been abducted at gunpoint near the same forest where we had camped. The location described in the article was just a few kilometers away from our campsite. 5 kilometers, maybe less. The details were limited, but the story was clear enough. The victim had been walking alone in the late afternoon when someone approached with a gun and forced them into a vehicle. The article said investigators believed the suspect might have been familiar with the area, possibly someone who frequented the woods. I read it 3 times. Every time, the same cold rush ran through my body. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. I felt the heaviness in my chest return. Suddenly, the memory of that night came back with full force. The quiet clearing, the gunshots exploding through the darkness. The tent shredded as if someone had wanted to make sure whatever was inside it wouldn't be standing afterward. The police had said someone was probably just fooling around with a gun. Someone careless. Someone who didn't know we were there. But now it felt different. Now it felt like there had been a person out there who wasn't shooting randomly at all. Someone who had no problem pointing a gun at another human being. Someone who had already proven 2 months later that they were willing to use that gun for something much worse. When I tried to put the 2 events together, a sick feeling crept up my spine. Maybe the person who tore through our tent that night wasn't just playing around. Maybe they weren't misfiring or trying out a new gun. Maybe they weren't confused or careless. Maybe the shots had been intentional, aimed at the tent because whoever held that gun wanted to see what or who was inside. Maybe they didn't care if they hit someone, or maybe they hoped they would. The possibility made me feel cold even in the safety of my house. It made that night in the woods take on a darker meaning. The tent had been empty, and that was the only reason we walked away unharmed. If we had been inside when the shots were fired, if we hadn't gone to the stream at that exact moment, if we had been just a few minutes slower, I didn't want to think about the rest. It was too easy to imagine the bullets hitting sleeping bags instead of fabric, hitting skin instead of nylon, hitting us instead of empty space. The forest, which had seemed peaceful and harmless when we first arrived, now felt like a trap we narrowly escaped without realizing it. The idea that someone armed and unpredictable was roaming around that night made my mind replay everything differently. Every distant sound I had ignored suddenly felt important. Every moment we spent near the tent before wandering away felt dangerous in hindsight. The news article didn't mention any names or suspect descriptions. It didn't say much about leads or arrests, but the timing and location were impossible to ignore. It felt like we had brushed past something violent and unpredictable, something that didn't reveal itself fully until months later. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about how thin the line had been between safety and danger that night. A few meters of distance, a few minutes of timing, a small decision to walk to the stream instead of sitting by the tent. Tiny choices that ended up meaning everything. The ending became painfully clear to me after reading that article. The police explanation had been comforting but shallow. The truth was much harder to swallow. Someone dangerous had been out there that night, someone who had no problem firing into a tent in a no-hunting area. And the fact that they later abducted someone with a gun just a few kilometers away confirmed that whatever happened near our tent was not harmless, not accidental, and definitely not a joke. What happened 2 months later didn't explain everything, but it explained enough to leave a lasting shadow over that night. It reminded me that the scariest things in the woods aren't animals, storms, or the darkness. They're people, unpredictable, reckless, violent people, who wander into places where others think they're safe. And that night, without realizing it, we came far too close to crossing paths with one of them. I still think about that camping trip more often than I want to admit. It happened years ago, but every time I hear a sudden loud noise, or even a car backfiring in the distance, something in my chest tightens and I am right back there in the dark, trying to understand what was happening around me. It started as a simple weekend outdoors, just a few days away from everything with family. It ended with questions that still bother me, questions that I don't think will ever fully be answered. We had chosen a quiet area near a forest, a place known for peaceful trails and calm views. It wasn't a remote wilderness, but it was far enough from towns that nights were pitch black and the silence felt heavy. It was a no-hunting zone, clearly marked, and that made us feel safe. We didn't expect any trouble. We only planned to enjoy the break, breathe fresh air, and sleep under the open sky. The first day had been warm and slow. We walked around, set up the tent, cooked simple food, and watched the sky turn orange as the sun dropped behind the trees. I remember thinking how good it felt to be away from noise. Even the sounds of insects and leaves moving in the breeze felt peaceful. When I went to sleep that night, the tent felt like a small safe bubble. I had no reason to believe anything bad could happen out there. I woke up sometime after midnight, not sure why. It wasn't a dream and it wasn't a sound at first. It was just a strange feeling, like my body already knew something was wrong before my mind did. I lay still on my sleeping bag and listened. The night was too quiet, too empty. Usually I could hear insects or wind or at least something, but everything felt paused, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then a distant pop echoed across the trees. For a moment I thought it might be a firework or something harmless, but the sound came again, sharper this time. It was unmistakably a gunshot. My stomach dropped. The noise felt too close, too real, and completely out of place for where we were. This was supposed to be a no-hunting area. Nobody should be firing anything. Before I could fully process the first gunshots, a second group of shots rang out, louder and closer. I felt every muscle in my body stiffen. I could feel my heartbeat pushing hard against my ribs. We scrambled out of the small clearing and moved away from the tent, hiding behind a cluster of trees and crouching low. There was no talking, no time to think, just instinct telling me to get out of the open before something hit us. The next shots came so close that I felt the air move with the sound. It was like the whole night exploded. The sharp cracks echoed against the surrounding trees, bouncing around until it was impossible to tell where exactly they came from. I remember gripping the dirt with both hands, trying to steady myself as adrenaline hit me all at once. When the shots finally stopped, the forest fell into the deepest silence I had ever heard. It didn't feel like normal quiet. It felt like something was waiting. I forced myself to turn my head toward the tent, and the sight of it wiped out whatever hint of calm I had left. The fabric was ripped apart, shredded, torn with holes that were the exact shape I dreaded seeing. Bullet holes, dozens of them. Some were small and clean, others were ragged where the fabric stretched as the shots tore through. Our tent looked like it had been targeted on purpose. That moment changed something in me. Fear became something solid, heavy, real in a way I had never felt before. I kept scanning the trees, expecting a figure to step out at any second. I couldn't imagine anyone firing that many rounds into a tent without checking to see who was inside. It made no sense. It felt personal, even though I knew it probably wasn't. We didn't sleep for the rest of that night. We didn't even stay near the campsite. We just waited in the dark, hidden, watching the tree line for any movement until the sky slowly shifted to gray and then to pale blue. When daylight finally came, it felt almost unreal. The forest looked calm again, almost gentle, like nothing had happened at all. Only the ruined tent remained as proof that the night hadn't been a nightmare. When we packed up and left, my hands shook the whole time. I kept my eyes on every shadow between the trees. I kept imagining someone watching us, someone who had been close enough to hit the tent that many times. Even though the sun was up, the fear stayed with me. When we got home, we went straight to the police station. They listened, took notes, and said they would look into it. They told us it was probably someone fooling around with a gun who didn't know we were there. I wanted to believe that, but the number of holes in the tent told a different story. It looked deliberate, precise, almost controlled. No wild, random shooting would look like that. Still, there was nothing else we could do. We gave them the location, explained everything, and waited for answers that never really came. The police had no leads, no witnesses, nothing to point to who had been out there firing guns that night. It bothered me, but after a few weeks, life returned to something normal. The memory stayed sharp, but the fear started to fade. Then, 2 months later, everything changed again. I was scrolling through the news when a headline caught my attention. It wasn't dramatic, just simple and short, but the words felt like a punch to the chest. Someone had been abducted at gunpoint just 5 kilometers from where we had camped that night. The article didn't give many details, just that a person had been taken by an unknown man with a gun, late at night, near a small forested area. I stared at the screen for a long time. 5 kilometers. That was nothing. In a car, it was minutes. On foot, it was still close enough to feel connected. My mind went back to the ruined tent, to the quiet after the gunshots, to the feeling that someone had been out there watching. I imagined the shooter moving through the trees, searching, checking tents, looking for someone alone or unprepared. It was impossible to know if it was the same person. There was no proof, but the timing, the location, the way the police had found nothing, everything lined up too neatly to ignore. Every part of me knew that something darker had been happening in those woods that night, something that had nothing to do with hunting or accidents or careless people messing around with guns. I thought about how close we had come to staying inside the tent when we first heard the shots. If we hadn't run, if we had hesitated even for a minute, the bullets would not have hit empty fabric. They would have hit us. The idea made my legs feel weak even as I stood in my own home, safe and far away from that forest. The ending to all of it isn't dramatic. There were no arrests, no clear answers, no final explanation to tie everything together. The person who was taken was eventually found alive, but no suspect was ever identified. The police never connected anything to our incident, at least not publicly. The forest is still open to campers, still marked as a peaceful area, still considered safe by people who have never heard the gunshots we heard. But I ended the story on my own terms. I stopped camping in isolated areas. I stopped assuming that rules like no hunting signs keep dangerous people away. I learned that sometimes the worst things happen where you least expect them, and sometimes you escape danger without even understanding how close it truly came. The tents, the trees, the quiet night, nothing about nature scared me. It was the thought of the person out there, someone carrying a gun through the darkness, someone firing into a tent without hesitation, someone who might have been only steps away from us. And the most unsettling part was knowing that we would never know the full truth. All we could do was move forward, grateful that we left those woods alive, knowing just how easily the story could have ended in a very different place. I still remember that night in the mountains with a kind of quiet dread. It was one of those moments where you don't really understand how scared you can get until you're already in the middle of it. I had been camping before, many times, but this trip was supposed to be a way to clear my head, to spend a night alone in a place where the air felt clean and the world seemed far away. I didn't expect anything unusual. I didn't expect anything dangerous. I thought the mountains were peaceful, predictable, just rock and wind and cold stars. The hike earlier in the day had been long and slow, but the views had kept me going. The slopes were wide and open, covered in short grass and scattered rocks, with sharp ridges in the distance. I had seen a few mountain goats far up on the cliffs, white shapes moving like they were part of the rock itself. I didn't think much of them. They kept their distance and I kept mine. It felt like a normal piece of nature you just respect and leave alone. By late afternoon, I found a flat spot a little above a valley. There were no trees, just low plants and a few boulders that had probably been there for thousands of years. The air was crisp, and the sky already had that soft evening color that made the mountains look endless. I set up my tent, cooked something small, and sat there listening to the wind brush along the slopes. I felt tired in a good way, the kind of tired that makes you think you'll sleep hard the moment you get into your bag. When the sun finally dropped behind the range, the temperature fell fast. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and settled into my sleeping bag. The silence felt clean, almost peaceful. My mind drifted, and slowly I started falling asleep, thinking that the night would be an easy one. It didn't last long. I woke up to a strange sound at first, something soft but steady. At first it almost blended with the wind, but then it became clearer. Small thumps, soft dragging noises, something brushing against the outside of the tent. My eyes opened fully, and my heartbeat changed immediately. I stayed still, listening, trying to figure out what could make those sounds at this altitude. Then I heard heavy breathing. Not human, not even close. It was low, deep, rhythmic, like something large was standing right outside the thin wall of fabric. I felt my body tense all at once. I didn't move, not even a hand. The sound came again, this time from the other side of the tent, followed by a sharp exhale. Then another one, and another. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was hearing. Multiple animals, close enough that I could hear their noses and mouths only inches away. I felt the first push against the tent wall. It was slow but heavy, like a strong shoulder leaning its weight into the fabric. The shape pressed inward, stretching the tent until the nylon brushed against my sleeping bag. I held my breath. The pressure moved along the side, dragging slightly, as if the animal was testing the surface. Another push came from behind me, then another one near my feet, then one right near my head. I could hear their hooves scraping the ground, small rocks shifting under them. The realization hit me hard. Mountain goats. Not just one, a whole group. And they weren't just passing by. They were surrounding the tent, nudging it, pushing at it, trying to figure out what it was or what might be inside. I lay completely still. I didn't even dare breathe loudly. I knew goats could be curious, but they could also be aggressive if something bothered them. A tent must have seemed strange to them on an open mountain. Maybe they smelled my food even though I had hung it outside and far away. Maybe they were just curious shapes in the dark. But the sounds they made, the snorting, the scraping of hooves, the sharp exhales, felt like they were inches from my skin. The tent dipped inward again, harder this time. The fabric touched my shoulder, pushing down with real force. I kept my eyes closed and stayed stiff, pretending I wasn't there, pretending I was just part of the ground. I felt another push near my legs and then another at my back. The goats weren't just exploring, they were trying to force their way in. One of them scraped its horn along the side of the tent, slow and rough. The sound was like someone dragging a stone across metal. It made every hair on my body rise. I imagined the horn catching the fabric and tearing straight through, and the thought alone made my stomach twist. I didn't want to move, because the moment they realized there was a person inside, everything could get worse. They could panic, or they could get aggressive, or they could trample straight through the tent without meaning to. I forced myself to breathe quietly, slow and controlled. I kept my body in the exact same position, not even shifting an inch. For a long time, maybe 30 minutes, maybe more, I stayed like that while the goats circled me. They pushed, sniffed, scraped, and breathed so close that I could hear every slight movement they made. At one point, one of them stepped so close that its hoof pressed down on the corner of my tent. The pressure felt like someone pushing a heavy boot on the fabric near my hip. I didn't move. I felt like if I twitched even a finger, something would happen that I couldn't undo. The tent was the only thin barrier between us, and I knew how easily that barrier could fail. It went on and on. The animals moved around me in slow loops, sometimes leaving one side only to push against another. I kept trying to control the panic growing in my chest. I kept telling myself to stay still, stay quiet, stay calm. I felt sweat on my back even though the air was freezing cold. Time felt slow and blurred, like every minute stretched into 10. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the nudging started to fade. The breathing moved farther away. I heard hooves stepping onto loose stones, shifting and climbing. One last scrape of horns brushed the back of the tent, light, almost lazy. Then silence slowly returned piece by piece. I didn't move for several minutes. I just lay there, listening, making sure the mountain goats were really gone. When I finally lifted my head slightly, the tent was still intact but slanted where it had been pushed in. I could feel the cold air moving gently again, the normal mountain silence taking its place. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed awake until sunrise, staring upward through the dark, waiting for another sound. When light finally touched the mountains and the inside of the tent turned a dull gray, I slowly unzipped the door and stepped outside. The campsite looked disturbed. Small hoof prints circled the entire tent, close enough that some were right against the fabric. The grass was bent and flattened where the goats had pressed against the tent. A few shallow scratches marked the nylon, thin but clear. I stood there for a long time looking at the signs, feeling that strange mix of relief and leftover fear. I packed up and left quickly, moving downhill until the valley felt wider and less tight around me. When I was finally far enough away, I stopped and took a long breath, trying to let the adrenaline drain from my system. It amazed me how something as simple as a curious herd of goats could bring that much fear. Not because they were evil or threatening by nature, but simply because being surrounded in the dark by something large and unpredictable makes you remember how fragile you really are out there. The ending is simple but real. I learned not to sleep in open goat territory again. I learned to check where herds usually move, where they graze, where they rest at night. I learned that nature doesn't need to be violent to be terrifying. Sometimes it's just the closeness of wild animals, the darkness around you, and the thin wall of a tent that holds your fear in place. I walked away unharmed, but that night stayed with me. Even now, when I lie in a tent far from anything, I sometimes remember the heavy breathing outside those thin walls, the slow pushing, the sound of horns scraping the fabric. It reminds me that in the mountains, you're never really alone, and the animals don't care whether you're ready for them or not.